when Nick Barnes crosses paths with his greatest enemy in the subway. A surprising turn of events. The rise and fall of Nick Barnes. The name Nick Barnes once echoed through the labyrinthine streets of Harlem like a whispered prayer and a chilling curse. In the late 1970s and early 80s, before the crack epidemic reshaped the landscape of urban crime, Barnes was a king. Not a king by divine right, but by sheer force of will, strategic brilliance, and an unyielding ruthlessness that carved out an empire from the city's underbelly. He was a product of Harlem, born into poverty, schooled in the harsh realities of survival, and destined, it seemed, to either be consumed by the streets or to conquer them. He chose the latter. Barnes began small, a street hustler with a sharp mind and an even sharper instinct for opportunity. He saw the burgeoning drug trade not just as a means to escape destitution, but as a complex logistical challenge, a business to be optimized. Unlike the impulsive, often violent, street-level dealers, Barnes approached his illicit enterprise with the cold calculation of a CEO. He studied supply chains, understood market demand, and built a network of distributors that stretched from the docks of New York to the furthest corners of the 5 boroughs. His product, a potent strain of heroin, became known for its purity and consistency, a brand in itself, and his organization, dubbed the Council, operated with a discipline rarely seen in the chaotic world of drug trafficking. His dominance in Harlem was absolute. He controlled the flow of narcotics, the gambling rackets, the numbers games, and even exerted influence over legitimate businesses. He was a paradox, a benefactor to some, funding community projects and providing jobs in a neighborhood starved for opportunity, and a brutal enforcer to others, quick to eliminate rivals or those who dared to cross him. He dressed impeccably, drove luxury cars, and lived in a manner that flaunted his wealth, a stark contrast to the poverty that surrounded him. He was a symbol of success, albeit a dark one, a testament to what a man could achieve through sheer ambition, regardless of the moral cost. His charisma was undeniable, his intelligence formidable, and his presence commanded respect, often born of fear. But every empire, no matter how meticulously constructed, carries the seeds of its own destruction. For Barnes, the cracks began to show as his fame grew. The very flamboyance that solidified his legend also drew unwanted attention. Federal agencies, particularly the newly formed Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, began to focus their considerable resources on dismantling his operation. The pressure mounted, internal betrayals became more frequent, and the once impenetrable council started to fray at the edges. The streets, once his domain, became a battleground, and the whispers of his invincibility began to fade. The final blow came in 1977. A massive federal indictment, the culmination of years of painstaking investigation, brought down Barnes and many of his top lieutenants. The charges were overwhelming: drug trafficking, conspiracy, murder. The trial was a media circus, a spectacle that captivated the nation. Barnes, ever the showman, maintained his composure, but the evidence was insurmountable. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, a sentence that effectively ended his reign and marked the definitive fall of the Harlem Kingpin. Prison was a different kind of jungle. The power he once wielded was gone, replaced by the rigid hierarchy of the correctional system. The luxury was replaced by concrete and steel, the deference by suspicion and contempt from both inmates and guards. For years, Barnes maintained a hardened exterior, a silent defiance. But as the decades wore on, something began to shift within him. The endless hours of solitude, the stark reality of his choices, the parade of younger men coming in and out, repeating the same mistakes he had made. It all chipped away at the edifice of the ruthless kingpin. He read voraciously, studied law, and, in his own way, began a slow, painful process of introspection. After serving over 40 years, a lifetime behind bars, Nick Barnes was released. He was an old man now, his once sharp features softened by age, his formidable physique stooped, his eyes holding a weariness that spoke of decades of regret and reflection. The Harlem he returned to was vastly different from the one he had left. The familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by gentrified storefronts and unfamiliar faces. The streets no longer whispered his name. They simply ignored him. He was a ghost in his own former kingdom, a relic of a bygone era. His current life was a stark contrast to his past. He lived in a small, government-subsidized apartment in a quiet part of the Bronx, far from the bustling energy of Harlem. He worked a mundane job, stocking shelves at a local grocery store, earning an honest wage for the first time in his adult life. The days were long, the work physically demanding, and the anonymity was both a blessing and a curse. He was free, but the freedom felt hollow, burdened by the weight of his past and the knowledge of the lives he had irrevocably altered. He carried his history like a heavy cloak, a constant reminder of the man he once was and the man he was trying, desperately, to become. The empire was gone, the power vanished, and all that remained was Nick Barnes, an old man trying to navigate a world that had long since forgotten him. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on more incredible stories of rise, fall, and unexpected turns. If Nick Barnes was the shadow that loomed large over Harlem, then Detective Miles Corbin was the relentless light that sought to expose him. Corbin was everything Barnes was not, a man of the law, driven by an unwavering moral compass, and committed to upholding justice in a city often consumed by its own darkness. He was a veteran of the NYPD, a detective whose career was defined by his quiet tenacity and an almost obsessive dedication to his cases. Unlike many of his colleagues who succumbed to cynicism or corruption in the face of the city's pervasive crime, Corbin remained steadfast, a beacon of integrity in a murky world. Corbin's introduction to Nick Barnes wasn't a single event, but a gradual, chilling realization. He had seen the devastation Barnes' empire wrought on Harlem firsthand: the addiction, the violence, the broken families, the lost generations. He watched as the community he swore to protect slowly eroded under the influence of Barnes' blue magic. For Corbin, Barnes wasn't just another criminal. He was the architect of despair, a force of destruction that needed to be stopped at all costs. Their rivalry was a protracted war of attrition, a cat-and-mouse game played out over years. Corbin led task forces, orchestrated raids, cultivated informants, and spent countless sleepless nights poring over evidence, trying to find the chink in Barnes' formidable armor. Barnes, with his network of spies and his uncanny ability to stay one step ahead, often seemed untouchable. There were near misses, tense standoffs, and moments when Corbin felt the cold breath of defeat on his neck. He saw Barnes' face in his nightmares, a symbol of the evil he fought daily. The personal toll on Corbin was immense. His marriage suffered under the strain of his relentless work. His children grew up with an often absent father, and the constant exposure to the city's underbelly left him with a deep-seated weariness. He sacrificed promotions, personal relationships, and his own peace of mind in his single-minded pursuit of Barnes. He was driven not by ambition, but by a profound sense of duty and a burning desire to see justice served. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that putting Barnes behind bars would make a tangible difference, that it would heal some of the wounds inflicted upon Harlem. When Barnes was finally arrested and convicted, it was Corbin who stood at the forefront of the victory. He had been instrumental in building the case, meticulously gathering the evidence that ultimately brought down the kingpin. It was a personal triumph, the culmination of years of sacrifice and dedication. He felt a fleeting sense of vindication, a belief that he had, in some small way, made the world a better place. But the victory was bittersweet. The problem of crime, particularly drug crime, didn't disappear with Barnes' incarceration. New kingpins emerged, new drugs flooded the streets, and the cycle of violence continued. Corbin rose through the ranks, eventually becoming a captain, but the shadow of Barnes, and the larger shadow of the systemic issues he fought, never truly left him. He retired a few years prior, his body tired, his spirit scarred, but his integrity intact. Now, in his early 70s, Miles Corbin lived a quiet life in Queens. He spent his days tending to his small garden, reading, and occasionally visiting his grandchildren. He was a man of routine, finding comfort in the predictable rhythm of retirement. Yet, beneath the calm exterior, the old fire still flickered. He still read the crime blotters, still watched the news with a critical eye, and still carried the weight of his past. He believed in justice, but he had also seen enough of the world to understand its complexities, its capacity for both profound good and unimaginable evil. He rarely thought of Nick Barnes anymore, not actively, but the memory of their long war was etched into his very being. He saw Barnes as a symbol of unrepentant evil, a man who had destroyed countless lives for personal gain. He believed Barnes to be irredeemable, a stain on the fabric of society that could never be truly washed away. The thought of Barnes being out of prison, walking the same streets, was a discomforting one, a reminder that some battles, even when won, leave scars that never truly fade. Corbin carried those scars, a ghost of the past, still vigilant, still wary, still ready to confront the darkness he had spent his life fighting. What are your thoughts on the relentless pursuit of justice, even at a personal cost? Leave a comment below and let us know. The New York City subway, a subterranean artery pulsating with the city's lifeblood, is a place where millions of lives intersect daily, often without a glance, a word, or even a conscious acknowledgement. It is a melting pot of humanity, a microcosm of the city itself, grimy, chaotic, and utterly indifferent to the individual dramas unfolding within its steel confines. It was here, on a Tuesday afternoon, that the past and present of Nick Barnes and Miles Corbin were destined to collide. Nick Barnes, now 78, was on his way home from his grocery store job. The fluorescent lights of the subway car hummed, casting a pale, sickly glow on the worn plastic seats and the faces of the weary commuters. He clutched a worn briefcase containing his lunch thermos and a paperback novel, a stark contrast to the designer briefcases that once held stacks of cash and illicit documents. He found an empty seat near the door, his aging knees grateful for the respite. He looked out the window, watching the blur of the tunnel walls, lost in the quiet contemplation that had become his constant companion. Miles Corbin, 73, was on the same train, 2 cars down. He was returning from visiting his daughter in Brooklyn, a rare excursion that had taken him out of his usual Queens routine. He stood near the pole, his posture still ramrod straight despite his age, his eyes scanning the car with the practiced vigilance of a retired cop. He observed the young couple laughing, the teenager engrossed in his phone, the homeless man huddled in the corner. His mind, ever analytical, processed the scene, looking for anomalies, for threats, a habit ingrained over decades of police work. The train rattled to a stop at a station, doors hissing open and then closing with a mechanical sigh. As the train pulled away, Corbin shifted his gaze, and that's when he saw him. A figure in the next car, through the connecting doors window. An old man, gray-haired, slightly stooped. But something in the profile, the set of the jaw, the way he held himself even in repose, sent a jolt through Corbin's system. It was a face he had seen in countless mugshots, in courtrooms, in his nightmares. It was Nick Barnes. Barnes, feeling an inexplicable prickle on the back of his neck, looked up. His eyes, once cold and calculating, now held a deep, almost melancholic wisdom. They met Corbin's across the short distance between the cars. For a moment, the world outside the subway car ceased to exist. The hum of the train, the chatter of passengers, the rhythmic sway, all faded into an indistinct background. There was only the two of them, separated by a pane of glass and decades of shared, bitter history. Corbin felt a surge of adrenaline, a primal instinct to confront, to accuse. The old anger, the years of frustration, the memory of all the lives Barnes had ruined, flared within him. He pushed through the connecting door, his steps deliberate, his gaze fixed on Barnes. Barnes watched him approach, a flicker of recognition, then resignation, crossing his face. He didn't flinch, didn't try to hide. He simply waited, his hands resting calmly on his briefcase. Barnes, Corbin's voice was low, gravelly, cutting through the ambient noise of the train. It wasn't a question, but an accusation, a statement of undeniable fact. Barnes met his gaze, a ghost of his old smirk playing on his lips, though it lacked its former menace. "Corbin," he replied, his voice raspy with age, but still carrying a hint of its former authority. "Still chasing shadows, detective?" "Some shadows cast a long damn light," Corbin retorted, standing over Barnes, his body language still that of an officer confronting a suspect. "Didn't think I'd ever see you out here. Thought you'd rot. Life has a way of surprising you," Barnes said, his eyes holding Corbin's. Just like this meeting. The tension in the air was thick, palpable. Other passengers, sensing the shift in atmosphere, began to cast nervous glances. This wasn't a casual encounter. This was history, raw and unresolved, playing out in the confined space of a subway car. Just as Corbin was about to unleash a torrent of pent-up anger and accusation, the train lurched violently. A sudden, piercing shriek of metal on metal filled the car, followed by a sickening sway. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the car into near darkness, illuminated only by the emergency lights and the faint glow from the tunnel. Passengers gasped, some cried out, and a collective wave of fear rippled through the car. A young woman, standing near the door, lost her balance and fell awkwardly, her head hitting the metal pole with a sickening thud. She lay motionless, a small trickle of blood appearing on her temple. Panic began to spread. Instinct took over. Corbin, the retired cop, immediately moved towards the fallen woman, his years of training kicking in. "Is anyone a doctor?" he called out, his voice cutting through the rising panic. Barnes, too, had reacted. He hadn't moved to help the woman directly, but his eyes, sharp and assessing, scanned the car. He saw a young man fumbling with his phone, trying to call for help, his hands shaking. He saw an elderly couple huddled together, terrified. He saw the chaos, and for a fleeting moment, the old Barnes, the one who commanded and controlled, resurfaced. "Stay calm." Barnes' voice, surprisingly strong, cut through the rising hysteria. "Everyone stay calm. The train will stop. Help is coming." It wasn't a plea. It was an order, delivered with an authority that momentarily silenced the rising panic. Corbin, kneeling beside the unconscious woman, looked up at Barnes, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. The man who had just been his sworn enemy was now, inexplicably, a calming presence in the chaos. The unexpected emergency had shattered the carefully constructed walls of their past, forcing them into a shared present, a moment where their old roles were irrelevant, and only their shared humanity mattered. The confrontation had begun with hatred, but the sudden turn of events had thrown them into an entirely new, unforeseen dynamic. If you're finding this story gripping, hit the like button to show your support. The subway car eventually came to a grinding halt, the emergency brakes hissing. The conductor's voice crackled over the intercom, assuring passengers that help was on the way and that the power outage was being addressed. The immediate panic subsided, replaced by a tense, anxious wait. The young woman was still unconscious, and Corbin, with the help of a few other passengers, had managed to make her comfortable, using a jacket as a makeshift pillow. Barnes, after his initial command, had retreated slightly, observing the scene. He hadn't offered direct assistance, but his presence, oddly, still held a calming effect. When Corbin looked up, their eyes met again. But this time, the animosity was tempered by a shared experience, a brief, unexpected alliance in the face of crisis. "She needs medical attention," Corbin stated, his voice strained. "Soon." Barnes nodded. "They'll be here. They always are." There was a weariness in his tone, a resignation that spoke volumes. The train remained stalled. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The other passengers, now mostly quiet, were either on their phones or staring blankly ahead. The immediate danger had passed, but the discomfort of the delay, coupled with the lingering tension between the two old men, created an almost surreal atmosphere. Corbin, still kneeling, looked at Barnes. "So, Barnes, what's it like, being out?" His voice was devoid of its earlier venom, replaced by a strange, almost detached curiosity. Barnes sighed, a long, drawn-out sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. "It's different. Everything's different. The city, the people, me." He paused, then continued, his gaze fixed on the floor. "You spend 40 years in a cage, you think about a lot of things. You think about what you did, who you hurt. You think about the choices you made." Corbin listened, surprised by the candor. He had expected defiance, perhaps even a boast. "Regrets?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. Barnes finally looked at him, his eyes holding a depth that Corbin had never seen before. "More than you can imagine, detective. More than you can imagine. I built an empire, yes. But what did I really build? A monument to my own ego, fueled by the destruction of my own people. I saw myself as a businessman, a king. But I was just a dealer, a poison peddler." He shook his head slowly. "The money, the power, it was all an illusion. It didn't buy me peace. It didn't buy me happiness. It bought me a cell and a lifetime of looking back. Corbin was taken aback. This wasn't the Nick Barnes he knew, the ruthless, unrepentant kingpin. This was an old man, stripped bare of his former glory, grappling with the profound consequences of his life. "I spent my life chasing you, Barnes," Corbin said, his voice low. "I saw what you did to Harlem. The families torn apart, the lives wasted. I believed you were pure evil. And for many, I was," Barnes conceded, his gaze unwavering. "I don't ask for forgiveness, Corbin. I don't deserve it. But I understand why you did what you did. You were trying to protect your city, your people. In your own way, you were fighting for what you believed was right, just as I was fighting for what I believed was mine." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken history. Corbin found himself reevaluating everything he thought he knew about his greatest enemy. He had always seen Barnes as a two-dimensional villain, a caricature of evil. But now, in this confined space, under the dim emergency lights, he saw a man, flawed and broken, but undeniably human. "It took a toll on me too, Barnes," Corbin admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "The job, the constant fight. My family, they paid a price. I put you away, and for a while, I thought that was it. Justice served. But the streets kept bleeding. And I realized it was never just about one man. It was bigger than that." Barnes nodded slowly. "It always is. The system, the poverty, the despair. I just exploited it. I didn't create it. But I certainly didn't help it." He looked around the subway car, at the diverse faces, the shared vulnerability. "You know, in prison, I saw a lot of young men come in, just like I was. Full of anger, full of ambition, no way out. And I realized, I was part of that cycle. I perpetuated it." The conversation continued, a strange, impromptu therapy session between two men who had once been mortal adversaries. Barnes spoke of his attempts to find meaning in his new, mundane life, the struggle to adapt, the quiet desperation of being an old man with a notorious past. He spoke of the small acts of kindness he now valued, the simple satisfaction of earning an honest dollar, the profound loneliness of having outlived most of his contemporaries. Corbin, in turn, spoke of his own disillusionment with the justice system, the feeling that even after decades of service, the fundamental problems remained. He spoke of the quiet regrets of a life dedicated to duty, the missed moments with his family, the lingering bitterness that had colored his retirement. In the dim light of the stalled subway car, stripped of their former power and authority, they were just two old men, sharing their burdens, their regrets, and their surprising, shared humanity. The revelations weren't about grand secrets, but about the quiet truths of their lives, truths that had been obscured by the roles they had played for so long. The shift in perspective was profound, a crack in the hardened shell of their rivalry, allowing a glimmer of understanding, and perhaps even a nascent form of redemption, to shine through. Subscribe for more untold stories that challenge perceptions and explore the depths of human experience. Eventually, the power was restored, and the subway car was bathed in the harsh glow of the fluorescent lights once more. Paramedics arrived, tending to the young woman, who slowly regained consciousness. The train, after a thorough check, began to move again, slowly at first, then picking up speed, resuming its journey as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Barnes and Corbin sat in silence for a few more stops, the weight of their conversation lingering in the air. The animosity had dissipated, replaced by a quiet, almost respectful understanding. When the train pulled into Barnes' stop, he stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked at Corbin, who was still seated. "Well, Detective," Barnes said, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips. "It was an interesting ride." Corbin nodded, a slight smile of his own. "Indeed, Barnes. Indeed." He extended a hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just an hour earlier. "Take care of yourself." Barnes took his hand, his grip surprisingly firm. "You too, Corbin. You too." With a final nod, Barnes stepped off the train, disappearing into the bustling crowd on the platform. Corbin watched him go, a strange mix of emotions swirling within him. The man he had spent decades hunting, the embodiment of evil in his mind, had just revealed a depth of regret and humanity he never thought possible. The aftermath of their meeting profoundly affected both men. For Nick Barnes, the encounter was a catalyst. The conversation with Corbin, the unexpected vulnerability he had shown and received, had solidified his resolve to truly change. He no longer felt like a ghost haunting his past. He felt like a man with a chance, however small, to build a new future. He started volunteering at a local community center, sharing his story with at-risk youth, not to glorify his past, but to warn them of its pitfalls. He spoke of the allure of quick money, the illusion of power, and the crushing weight of its consequences. He found a quiet satisfaction in these small acts of service, a sense of purpose that transcended the fleeting thrill of his former life. He was still Nick Barnes, but he was also something more, something redeemed. He carried the scars of his past, but now, they were lessons, not just burdens. For Miles Corbin, the encounter was a profound challenge to his long-held beliefs. He had always seen the world in stark black and white, good versus evil. Barnes had been the ultimate villain, and his capture the ultimate victory. But the subway conversation had blurred those lines, revealing the complex shades of gray that existed even in the darkest corners of human experience. He began to question his own cynicism, his unwavering belief in the irredeemability of certain individuals. He realized that true justice might not just be about punishment, but also about the possibility of transformation, about the capacity for change that resides within every human heart. He found a new sense of peace regarding his past, a quiet acceptance that his fight, while necessary, was only one part of a much larger, more intricate tapestry of human existence. He started spending more time with his family, cherishing the present, and letting go of some of the bitterness that had colored his retirement. They never sought each other out again, but their paths did cross once more, years later. It was a chance encounter in a park, both men older, perhaps a little friendlier. They simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their shared, transformative moment. There was no need for words, no need for grand gestures. The understanding was implicit, a quiet testament to the unexpected connection forged in the belly of the subway. The surprising conclusion of their story is not a tale of enemies becoming friends, or of a complete erasure of past wrongs. It is a more nuanced, profound realization about human nature itself. It is a testament to the idea that even the deepest rivalries, fueled by decades of conflict and animosity, can be transcended by a moment of shared humanity. It speaks to the enduring capacity for change, for introspection, and for the possibility of redemption, even for those who have committed great wrongs. Nick Barnes and Miles Corbin, once locked in a bitter struggle for the soul of Harlem, ultimately found a common ground not in their shared history of conflict, but in their shared experience of aging, regret, and the quiet search for meaning. Their subway encounter was a stark reminder that beneath the labels of criminal and cop, beneath the roles we play and the empires we build or dismantle, we are all just human beings, capable of both immense destruction and profound transformation. It was a surprising turn of events that illuminated the enduring power of empathy, the unexpected paths to understanding, and the quiet, persistent hope for second chances in the most unlikely of places. What do you think about the possibility of redemption and unexpected connections? Like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more compelling stories.